Hey guys, back here at the Prelude again. Like I said, I want to get back to you guys a little bit quicker, so here I am. And what I'm doing right now is converting a lot of the fuel line that's on the system over. I've already done a couple things, but I figure I'd at least bring you along and show you what I've done so far. So, I really like the look of AN stuff, and I actually was in the group buy. I have it hidden over here. Actually, you know what? Let me drag it out real quick. Got lots of little goodies hidden over here. But I had actually gotten in on the group buy from Roscoe Racing some years ago. At this point now, I think it's been the better part of 9 to 10 years since I bought this, and I have one of the few billet fuel rails that were ever made for our car. And at the time I thought I was going to go make this thing a really hardcore race car, which I'm still not doing at this point. But he made a version where you could mount a fuel pressure regulator on here instead of going remote. And I thought I was going to use a remote one, and now I'm kind of not. I got a radium fuel pressure regulator that is actually AN, but it mounts straight to the rail here. So that's what I'm doing for that. But to use these AN fittings, I am converting everything, at least in the engine bay, well, most things in the engine bay, over to AN. Looking back on it, if I would have realized the cost of some of these fittings and such, I probably would have just went ahead and actually ran AN fuel line all the way from the engine bay to the fuel pump and just called it a day. I mean, really all it would have costed was buying one more roll of fuel hose. But at this point, I have enough done that I'm not going back, at least for now. But what I did here was actually cut off the OEM flare fitting that was at the end where it came into the engine bay here, and swapped it out for a pressure fitting that converts to AN. So I think it's going to be clean enough, and I'm going to end up running it from here. Then I have an air motive filter that I'm actually going to be mounting here on the firewall, and that's also why I've started to get rid of some of these brackets and such. I'm going to be mounting that, and then my catch can for my PCV system over here. So here's going to be that. Fuel filter is going to be mounted here, and a lot of these brackets are just going to make things too complicated. So we're going to be removing those, cleaning up the spots where they're taken out, and actually throwing rib nuts into the firewall. I'll walk you through on the rib nuts whenever I get to that point, but I figured I would at least show you what I've done so far. So part of the benefit of changing over is the steel lines are actually going to be fine with E85, and that's what I'm planning on changing to, is E85 fuel, because you can make more power and make it more safely. So the steel fuel lines are fine. The AN lines are definitely going to be okay, but what would have been the factory fuel hose, although I know there are plenty of people that have gotten away with it and been okay, I've also seen videos where people will literally be on the dyno and the ethanol just starts to eat through the rubber from the inside out, or even on the outside in on an in-tank fuel line. So I'm just going to replace most of the rubber on the car. There's one on right at the fuel pump that I'm not so sure how I would go about it, but I'm going to leave it for now. But I already changed the return line here over to radium ethanol rated fuel hose, and then also to go with the ethanol compatibility, and because I need more fuel, I went with the AEM 320 fuel pump, which is E85 friendly. And I also got Radium offered ethanol safe in-tank fuel hose, which apparently is a different, totally different rating from fuel hose that doesn't sit inside of fuel, so keep that in mind whenever you do this. But yeah, so it's going to be a stock sending unit, but I am very excited about throwing this fuel pump in. It's actually crazy how much smaller something that I would imagine puts out at least, I don't know, double if not triple the amount of output of the larger OEM unit. But I do, especially looking at it right now, the strainer was down further into the fuel tank than this was, so whenever I start getting low on fuel, I'm not going to be able to go, I mean, not that you should ever run your tank very low anyhow, but whenever it starts to probably get to below half a tank or get close to a third of the tank, definitely got to be more cautious about making sure there is more fuel in the car. But I've also been back in the trunk area pulling this out, and I'm converting, like I said, the rest of the hose. So like this is the hose that attached to the fuel return there. I cut out another piece of the radium stuff, and their fittings are very nice. They have very consistent clamping pressure and everything. But there are some spots where I'm not planning on taking the fuel tank out right now, so this one is not going to be accessible with the fuel tank in. But yeah, I'm doing what I can for now. Hey guys, back here with the turbo Prelude build. Right now I'm in the process of putting together the bottom end, and I figure I'd bring you along and show you basically whenever people say that, oh hey, if you're going to turbo your engine, you probably want to go ahead and do some supporting like engine components. Primarily what they're usually talking about would be like pistons and rods, throwing in the head studs and upgrading the head gasket, especially on our engines, because the ones that came on our engines were like just composite, very old style, and these Cometic head gaskets are actually better. They make specifically MLS head gaskets for our engine. And also part of the thing is, if you're going to use a Cometic head gasket, what you should do is go and get the deck blocked, like I have done here. So here's the first shot of my engine or my block uncovered since the machine shop. But yeah, the actual deck surface is actually a little more rough from the factory. You can see here it didn't clean up perfectly, but around the actual cylinders the cut came out pretty nice, so it should seal just fine. But yeah, so had the bored out 1 millimeter oversized. It was 81. There was some rust down inside a couple of these bores, so I needed them cleaned up anyways, and then a little extra bore size I figured would be nice for a little bit more power. I ended up going with 9-to-1 pistons, which are right here. Wiseco pistons. And another part of the process, while whenever you get a cylinder freshly bored and throwing new pistons in with it, obviously you have to throw in piston rings that have never been sized or clearanced for this fresh cylinder wall. So I've actually gone through the first 3 sets here, and I have just the last and 4th one to do. I've gone through and filed the ring gaps, and here, I'll bring you along here in just a minute to show you just what I'm talking about. Alright, so now I'm going to show you what I'm doing here is filing piston rings for the end gap. Basically these gaps right here, if for some reason, well, okay, what happens is whenever you're making more horsepower, whether it be naturally aspirated or turbocharged or nitrous, or maybe it's just because you're actually running at track events, and you're gonna get more overall heat in there. Even if you have like an upgraded radiator, it's still gonna be hot in the cylinders. You need to make sure that this gap right here doesn't touch, because if that gap touches, then basically you will deform the ring, and potentially you could have a piston seize in the cylinder, and you're not going to have any fun with that. So what I'm going over here is showing you how to measure ring gap and how to file it. I can honestly say this is my first I've ever done, but I can say that I did the other 3 cylinders first to make sure I kind of understood and had a good grasp of what I was doing after watching some tutorials and stuff. Real Street Performance has a really good video on it. I'd say go over there if you want like actual tips and tricks. I'm going to show you what I've learned and what I know from so far. So basically, you want to put a little bit of oil down the cylinders and having just a little bit of oil on the rings and stuff are fine too. And then you want to actually put the rings into the cylinder. So you just kind of squeeze it, put it in there a little bit, make sure it's down and staying in by itself. You don't have any of it hanging up. Then you use the piston, put it down about 1 inch or so. I've been going until this kind of matches flush here. And that evens out the piston ring and the cylinder. And then what you're going to want is a set of feeler gauges. I bought these off of Summit. You can find them at most normal auto parts stores. And this right here is for 10 thousandths for the top ring for what I'm doing. Right here is the actual gap. And what I'm going for on these, this is the top ring, I'm going for 18 thousandths. The second ring, I'm going for 20 thousandths. So this is 10. And it's a little tight in there. But you can still go more. So a feeler gauge, you want to be able to feel a little bit of drag. So as far as I'm concerned, that's at least 10 thousandths, but probably a little more. And that's 12 thousandths. That hardly fits. So I'd say this ring right here is at about 11 thousandths, and we need to grind this all the way out to 18. So this is a standard piston ring filing tool right here. I got this off of Summit. It's about a $50 tool. And whenever you do this, you only want to do one side of the ring at a time. So you want to make sure you square this up, and you want to go very slow, because basically you don't want to get any chipping on the edge of this ring here. And you also want to make sure it's filed smooth, because if it's not smooth, basically you're going to have an uneven gap. So right now you can pinch that together and it's pretty much straight. But if you file it crooked, basically you're going to have a small gap here on the ends and a large gap on the inside, and that's you basically just will have two different profile ring gaps, and you just don't want to do that. But here I'll show you how to do it. You want to go real slow. The top ring is a lot more harder material, so it actually takes a bit longer to grind, and you always want to turn the filer in a counterclockwise motion, and you don't want to press the ring against it, because it will do a poor job and will start chipping and do a real poor job filing the end of the ring. You want to go very slow, and you'll get a consistent edge on it. If you saw in there, I actually paused for just a second, and that's because I could tell I was getting a little too aggressive with it. That's what you don't want to do. But so far it filed up pretty good. You want to make sure there's no rough edges anywhere around, and you want to get a little jeweler's file. They're both diamond cutting disc, but a little jeweler's file, and you can take away burrs if needed. But we're going to go ahead and put it back in the cylinder and measure it again. Pull it back up. And I said we were right around 11 thousandths. This top ring seems to go rather slow. So that's 12 thousandths, and we still didn't even make a dent. So we're going to do some more filing. clean off the little bit of shavings there. We'll try it again. Sometimes I'll check and make sure that I'm keeping that edge square, and if not, I'll try to readjust my method of cutting when I go back to the ring filer. And we've got 12 thousandths, and we are just at 12 thousandths. If that was our intended measurement, I would leave it right there. Alright, so you get the gist here. We're going to keep on doing a recording here, but I think I'm going to turn this into a time lapse. Alright, now we got to our desired piston ring gap down here. You can see this 18 thousandths feeler gauge fits and just sits in there, so that is at the proper clearance. You can see the gap is actually pretty square, so that is gapping the top piston ring. Now the second ring here is actually made out, it's actually slightly thicker, but it's also made out of a softer material. So especially if you go through and you do all your top rings, and I don't know if I specified this earlier, but you want to do each of these rings to each of the different cylinders here, because there may be slight variations. So you just want to basically, like, if you look over here, I've done each of these. This is my 1, 2, 3, and now we're doing the fourth piston over here, or fourth cylinder. So that's how I've been going about this. But now, so our top ring is done, and now we're going to throw in our second ring. The first one was going to 20,000 or 18 thousandths. This one's going to 20 thousandths per what they recommend for the use case. And let's see where we're at here. One of these was actually already at 20 thousandths, so maybe we'll get lucky. That's 16. Here's our 18 thousandths again. And that's right at 18 thousandths. So we only need to take out 2 thousandths of material. So with this one, we're going to want to be gentle. Okay, not quite yet. And if I didn't reiterate this already, it's best to just go easy, go slow, and check a lot, because you only get really one chance at doing these. I guess if you go a little overboard on one, you could see how they size up in another cylinder, but generally you'll just have to get a new ring set if it's beyond what you're okay with. Okay, that 20 thousandths still isn't going in, and our gap here is still pretty square. And that's about perfect there. So that is gapping piston rings, and so at this point I'm ready to start throwing the rings on the pistons. Actually, I take that back. I need to get the pistons attached to the rods, and I'm going to go through and do a final clean on my engine block, because you definitely want to make sure it's very clean, as clean as you can get it before you start assembling it. I know I've heard stories of, you know, just sandblast media or whatever stuck somewhere in a pocket in an engine, and I mean, whenever you go to run your engine that you put all this money and effort into, might not go as you planned. So just keep on cleaning and make sure you're happy with it before you put it in your car. Alright, now that we have our piston rings gapped, it's time to start assembling the pistons and rods. Now, although I've assembled pistons and rods before, I've never done an aftermarket set, so I just went ahead and did a couple of them off camera here. But I figure I'd try to bring you through on how the process goes. So, have Wiseco pistons here, and then Eagle H-beam rods. These are specifically made for our engine, and these I believe are made for like the F20B and H23. They also happen to fit our engines as well. But yeah, the design on these has a C-clip on either end. I did not get one of those out before turning on the camera, so give me just a second here. So this is what those C-clips look like. There are small recesses machined in the piston on either side. You can see that right there, that little groove. And then there's a pocket right there, so that if you ever have to remove these C-clips, you can just put a small tool in there and just pry out and get the C-clip out, and that's how you would actually disassemble pistons and rods. So let me see if I can't find an angle here. Alright, so to install the C-clip, I mean, this is actually nothing special. I mean, I guess if you've never done it before, I understand where the confusion in it is, but just go ahead and get one side started, and then a pocket screwdriver could help, but this one, you're able to just press it in and it's in there. That's as simple as it is, and that's all that retains the rod pin in there. Alright, and you want to have uniformity when you're putting this together. Apparently I checked, like I said, I've messed with pistons and rods before, but I've never put in fresh that have never been installed in an engine before, if you know what I mean. Like I've replaced pistons or re-ringed them, but I've never had to install a new set. But anyhow, rods are not directional, but apparently you do want to make sure that these tangs are definitely lined up whenever you install the rod cap itself. Apparently, they're not directional on this engine. Apparently on V8s, there will be a recess on one side, and that will determine which side goes on to the crank. But in this situation, that's not a concern. I have determined the way I'm going to orient these, like so, and whenever it's time, what I've done is I've actually taken my wrist pins here and I've put them here in my little freezer section of my little mini fridge, and I have a heat gun here that I'm going to use to heat up the journal on the rod. Sorry if this is not a very enjoyable noise, but basically just going to heat this up for a minute or so. Then whenever I feel like it's good enough, I'll be able to slap it, the end of the rod, right into the piston, and the wrist pin will slip right through and it'll be assembled. pin real quick. Try not to burn anything with that. Slides right in. Okay. I'm going to insert this last C-clip. Make sure this rod is somewhat centered on the wrist pin. And that's an assembled piston and rod. And what I have done, well, like I said, I've never assembled just fresh like this before, but what I always do is I will make a marking on the rod cap and try to make it as obvious as possible which cylinder it goes in and which orientation it goes in. So as you can see on these over here, I already have my number 4 and my number 3 marked out. Now my number 2, and I'm keeping them in the same orientation. There are the reliefs on the top of the piston are different. You can see the intake side is slightly larger than the exhaust side, and you definitely, I mean, obviously you can just deal with this as you install the pistons and rods, but I'm keeping track as I go along. So there's 3 down, 1 more. I'll bring you back along whenever I have something to show you. Alright guys, so I think I'm going to end this video here. I still have more to do obviously with the bottom end, but I figure I'd at least bring you along on filing piston rings and how to assemble a piston and rod, at least this particular type. There are definitely different styles. But yeah, everything is ready to go in as far as the pistons and rods, the block. Next video I'm going to be cleaning up the crankshaft and measuring bearing clearances, so I'll bring you along for that on the next one. Until then, see you guys soon.